Welcome everyone to Real Estate with Gwen Price, and my guest today is Amy Best with Best Law Offices. You're a lawyer there. Welcome.
Thanks, Gwen. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, there's so much always to talk about in the real estate world and in the legal world as it pertains to real estate, and often, because I'm a seniors real estate specialist, I do deal with seniors who are either they've passed away or they're also thinking of selling, or maybe there's even a power of attorney involved, and things aren't. It's a little bit more of a process when you're dealing with seniors, because oftentimes they need support from the family members, from the realtor. It's a very stressful time for them to make such a big decision. So while they're still alive and they're cognizant, they're aware, there's no dementia, that sort of thing, it's easy enough, even though it's stressful, but they're the ones making the decision. But that's not always the case, right? Sometimes there will be somebody with a power of attorney, or if they've passed away, there may be somebody who's the executor. Can you explain a little bit more about those things? Because I think there's a lot of confusion when it comes to those terms.
Sure. So first of all, executor versus power of attorney. So executor is the person who's in charge of someone's will. And someone's will is only effective once that person has died. So if I have a will that says who's in charge of taking care of my affairs after I've died, that person is my executor, also known as a estate trustee. If I am still alive, I might have a power of attorney. That's a separate document that I've signed appointing that person, my power of attorney, or maybe I'm appointed two people acting together as my powers of attorney.
Right.
And it can be the same person as your executor, and that's probably where a lot of the confusion comes in, because I see a lot of agreements of purchase and sale where I know the seller has died and I see a person's name POA.
Right.
So that's not right, but maybe usually works out fine because we sort it out. So yeah, executor, the landowner is no longer alive. Mm-hmm. Power of attorney, the owner is still alive. And then you might have, try not to get down too much of a rabbit hole. You might have two owners on title.
Right.
Well, one's alive and one has died. Well, that's where it depends how they held the title. Was it, if it was joint tenants, then the surviving owner can deal with the property alone. And but if they held property the other way, then you might be dealing with the executor of the person who's no longer alive, and that might be someone different than the other owner. So I guess you would always want to just do the initial title search, see who the actual owners are, and go forward from there. If your client if your client is, if the seller's still alive, yeah, ideally, if they have capacity, then they would be signing everything themselves, closing all of the sale papers, doing all that.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, if a power of attorney is going to be used, then you as the real estate agent, you would want to see that power of attorney right away, right from the get-go.
Right.
And you want to read it, because a power of attorney can be general, or it can be specific to just appointing that person to deal with selling this house. So you want to see, is it general or specific? And you also want to read it carefully to see if it says that it can be used anytime, or if it says the power of attorney can only be used if the person who granted it has been found incapable.
Yeah, because sometimes I've seen power of attorneys where maybe one of the spouses is, he's out of the country working, they need somebody to step in and be the power of attorney while they're away, or whatever reason there. But most typically I see it where somebody's got power of attorney because the senior is not able to make decisions anymore on their own. And it's very important who you make your power of attorney, because like somebody always said to me, it's like giving somebody a blank check, right? Because they basically have a lot of power in that power of attorney.
That's right. They have a lot of power. So yeah, it's really, really important to have a power of attorney for these situations. But exactly, you have to be very careful, think very carefully about who you grant your power of attorney to, because a power of attorney in the wrong hands is very, very dangerous to you. You could be wiped clean and your power of attorney fly off to Mexico and live on the beach off your money. So it's serious stuff. But I always tell my clients, you know, assuming you have someone or two people that you trust, usually it's much better to have one than to not have one, because if you do not have one, the process for your family or whoever would apply to be able to manage your money or sell your house in this situation while you're still alive is very complicated and very expensive if you didn't make one while you were capable. And like you said a minute ago, yeah, you could have someone's power of attorney because they're on a long work trip and they can't actually do the signing, and you could use it for them. So powers of attorney can be used for those practical reasons too. When I was a student and I lived out of town, I appointed my dad as my power of attorney so he could, I don't even know what he used it for, but whatever it was in my best interest, because when you're acting as someone's powers of attorney, you have to act in their best interest. But obviously the risk happens when the person doesn't act in your best interests and steals from you, commits fraud basically. But usually it's too late once those things are discovered to get the money back.
And it's not always family members who might have the power of attorney. It might be a friend or someone. It's who you trust, right?
That's right. It doesn't have to be a family member. It could be whoever you choose. It could be, I like to recommend that it's two people that act together. That protects you.
Yeah.
So yeah, powers of attorney are super important to have. And when you meet a client and they say, or maybe it's someone's daughter, and they say, well, maybe we'll just use the power of attorney. What you as an agent would want to be aware of is that whenever a power of attorney document is used in a sale, there's a whole extra bunch of questions and due diligence and behind the scenes stuff that has to go on for the closing.
Well, and it's to protect people, you know, that some untoward person isn't doing something wrong, right? And it's a good idea, you're right, to have two people involved.
Are you there?
Yeah. Oh,
yeah. It's to protect the person whose name is being, well, it's to protect the person who owns the property. It's to protect the buyer. It's to protect the buyer's lender, all this extra due diligence. Because there could be a power of attorney that's anyway, cut that part out.
Well, it does. It's a serious document, and there are power of attorneys for health, I guess, and as well as buildings, chattels, all that kind of thing. It's different. Health is different. There's two different types of power of attorneys. Is that correct?
You got it. You can't sell the real estate with the medical power of attorney. It's got to be the power of attorney for property. And you can have the same people to be your powers of attorney, and it is possible to have both powers of attorney on one document, but that's not very common. Whenever I do powers of attorney for a client, I do one document for property, finances, real estate, and then I do a separate power of attorney for medical decisions. And it's often the same family members or combination of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, if someone wants to use a power of attorney, you would want to see the original right away, not just a photocopy of it, because the lawyer for the buyer and the seller are probably both going to need to see an original signed version of it or a notarized copy, which is not a straight photocopy. And that has to do with the due diligence and checking out for fraud. And they're also going to ask questions. Okay, why is the power of attorney being used? Where is the person? What's the situation? Yeah, so, but you know, sales by powers of attorney happen all the time. It just adds a little layer of complexity, which is totally normal.
Yeah.
And then in terms of, I'll go back to talking about executor for a minute there. So if the seller, of the property, if the owner of the property is not alive, then you're dealing with the executor of the person's estate, and that's set out in their will. And often the will, so if the property is just owned by one person, there's a pretty good chance that the will is going to need to be probated, which is a process with the court to basically have the court approve the will as the person's last will, to make sure that there's no subsequent will out there, that no one has challenged the executor's authority under the will. So if you know that that the person is deceased, you would ask the person who is saying, I'm the executor, you would want to see the will and read it and check to see that that is the right person who is the executor, and ask them, has the estate been probated yet? Have you gotten named by the court? Because when the person has died, the executor's authority arises right away on the person's death. But the land registry office and banks and financial institutions, are often required the formal process of the probate before the real estate can be sold. So if a client, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's why sometimes when the properties are listed and probate hasn't been, it can take a while, and there's no set date and time when that probate will be finished.
That's right. It all depends on how quickly the executor has gathered all the information that they need to get together, and brought it to the lawyer for the estate to put all that information together, apply to the court, wait for the court to process it. In Sudbury, they're very fast. They're pretty quick. And but still, it's a process. It does take some time. So if you know that the estate needs to be probated and it hasn't happened yet, you wouldn't set a firm closing date unless you had otherwise planned for it to be extended pending getting the probate.
Yeah, I have seen a clause that's used in our real estate association with regards to probate, that's a potential, even if there is a date on the offer, that isn't necessarily what the closing date's going to be. It could be needing to be extended because probate hasn't been completed.
Yeah, exactly. You just want to make sure everybody's on the same page, that the buyer knows, well, it's conditional on getting the probate back in time, and that the seller knows, oh, you could lose this deal if the agreement doesn't protect for the fact that you might not have, because the executor with a will, I always tell clients, you can get the house ready for sale, contact Gwen, talk to her, you can sign the listing agreement, you can sign the agreement of purchase and sale, but you can't close the deal until the probate has been granted by the court.
Is there any typical length of time that probate takes, or is it just varies on the people involved, the estate, or?
If my client gave me all the information I needed to do the application, then it would take me, a couple days or a week to prepare the papers. They'd come in, they'd sign the papers, and if we sent it up to the court in Sudbury, we usually get them back within 3-4 weeks.
Okay.
And sometimes it can be a bit quicker if you ask really nicely and let them know there's a date coming up. But
so it's not like 6 months or not?
No.
would be.
That, I think it does take that long in some Southern Ontario parts. It depends on each courthouse. I've heard of Barrie being really slower just from doing one there.
Okay.
But no, since I've been doing it, it's quite fast.
Well,
I've even gotten one back in, I don't know, 4 days once.
wow.
It just got there at the right time. There was not, it depends how many are in line too.
Yeah, true. Well,
Yeah.
because this is something that comes up a lot, and especially with an aging demographic, and that there's more and more people.
Mm-hmm.
You hear the terms probate thrown around, executor, power of attorney, and I do think there's a lot of confusion about especially executor, power of attorney, those terms. And
Yeah. Well, and it's possible that when you started working with someone, it was by power of attorney, and then maybe the person passed away, and now is it the same person, the executor? But yeah, I think it's usually just a misunderstanding of what the two words or the two terms mean.
And it's certainly important. I tell people this all the time because I do deal with seniors, that it's very important to have a will, because you don't want the government getting involved in all of your decisions, right? It's important to have that document and not just something that was scratched out on a piece of paper or some verbal agreement somebody made. It's very important to have a good will put together.
It's so important. You
Yeah.
pay taxes your whole life. You don't want to pay any more than you need to, and it's more than that. It's stress for your family. It's applying, thinking about what you want and getting it papered properly so that it can be carried out after you've died with as little expense and stress and drama as possible. And I know it's a big upfront expense for people, but it's so important. And I mean, I do this a lot. I meet with people and I have them fill out a questionnaire ahead of time so that I have a sense of who they are and what they have, and then we meet. And so it's a process, and I know it's costly, but you don't have to, what am I trying to say? It's best to meet with someone who knows what to ask you. And a big part of doing a will properly is having it signed and witnessed properly.
Exactly.
So many people don't realize that if you don't witness and carry out all these formalities with your will, it could have the effect of being totally void, and you've been totally thwarted, and everyone's frustrated, and then you have, oh, well, dad told me this and mom said this. And
I'm getting this. Well, and I do see families where when money's involved, it can really tear families apart if it isn't clearly laid out who's getting what and how things are going to be disposed of. And it's much, you're right that it absolutely is worth whatever the expense is to draft up a good, valid will. And then there isn't all the drama, because money can tear a family apart, and I hate to see that.
It does, and often it's accentuating, pre-existing tensions between kids and this. But yeah, I mean, that's the best thing you could do, that and do your power of attorney. But there's, in the last 5 years, there's middle ground cost wills where you can, the ones that you get at the I don't want to name any stores, the ones you buy at the store, and the really, really cheap ones online, those are the worst. I mean, be very careful. But there's some ones that you can work with online that might, I don't know how much they cost, but maybe, $400, $500. And those are developed by, just be careful which company you use, but a lot of those are really good, and you just have to do it really carefully. I'm not saying go and make your own will by yourself, but think about it, and it's so important to have one, and to make sure it's signed properly so that your executor knows they're the job and even knows where to find it. A lot of people, they make their will and then they don't tell the important people where it is, and it's lost or thrown out or.
Well, And you know, you could be talking a sizable estate. I mean, for some people, maybe there isn't anything significant left at the end of the day, but
Yes,
for some
yes.
people, there is still a house, which can be a very valuable asset. There can be other investments and all that kind of thing. So and that's definitely a will is very important. And
Yeah, even if there's no big asset left, it's sometimes, oh, the hoops that you'd have to jump through, even to deal, you know, an elderly lady whose husband has passed away and he didn't have a will. They didn't have much, but the hoops that the elderly lady has to get through to transfer the car into her name when there's no will.
yeah,
You know, that's a good reason enough for the husband and wife, both of them, to have wills.
no,
It's just, I hate seeing those.
well, it's stressful enough, right, when somebody passes away, and you try to relieve that stress, and certainly if all the right documents are already in place, that's a really big step forward to making, because you've lost somebody, and that's hard enough, let alone with having to deal with all of the paperwork. And you can't leave this earth without doing, I mean, your family's going to have to do paperwork one way or the other, right, with Revenue Canada,
Yeah,
whoever. And it's not an easy thing to go through, but it's a necessity, especially, you know, if
yes,
there's,
yes. And even, I mean,
yeah,
even with a will, a properly done will, there's still the need, there still might be the need to probate that will
right,
in order to sell the house.
yeah,
Some people, they misunderstand. They think, well, I have a will, therefore that's it. Well, no, because the bank still might require probate. The land registry office won't allow the house to be sold. So it's really just part of the whole process. So
yeah, well,
yeah.
that's why definitely they need to talk to a lawyer, and I'm going to have all your information post this, Amy, and because, yeah, again, both of us, we know a will is needed. We know powers of attorney are necessary too. So
Yeah,
it's a good thing to do. And
yeah.
save
And
your,
you can learn a lot about, you can learn a lot. There's a lot of good articles online. Just be careful what you're reading, but you can learn a lot. There's a lot of law firms that post about wills and powers of attorney and all this stuff. So you can educate yourself a lot, because a lot, I hear so many, oh, I heard this, I heard that. Well,
yeah.
that was based on that family's specific facts and information. And there's a lot of that misinformation going around. So
And power of attorneys have changed over time too, right? So things, you know, the way they were 50 years ago isn't necessarily the way things are now, but definitely people need power of attorneys, they need wills, and a lawyer can help. And so I will have all your contact information. But thank you so much again, Amy. It was very informative.
you're welcome. I feel like I just talked a lot.
No, that's okay. It's important information, and we deal with it all the time, and knowledge is everything, right?
That's right. Okay, thanks.
So
We'll
much.
do it again.
Okay, take care.
Okay, bye, Gwen. Talk to you soon.